So it's good that each of you is almost, so this is one program that I always suggest to many of our students, that you should adopt a sacred grove for a life. Yeah. So maybe you can keep on going to that sacred grove throughout your life, have connect with that sacred grove and as well as local people around that, and keep on helping them the way you can. Maybe even just by visiting them, maybe just letting them know. And that's, I think, this is a wonderful thing that each of you have selected such kind of sacred grove. Yeah. So I've kept this in Marathi because I've done this kind of presentation in for some Marathi group, and in Marathi, I'm sure you, if you can read Devanagari. So this is Dev Rai is written on this title slide. Dev Rai is, Dev is God and Rai is stands for some kind of grove. So in Maharashtra, we call sacred grove as Dev Rai. Yeah. So, what is sacred grove again? Some kind of forest area which is preserved after the name of some deity. Yeah. So, local people think that they will get punished if at all they disturb that particular area. Then, if you look at the history and distribution, we'll go through it quickly. Then, we'll also try to understand ecological significance of it. So, this is very important, I think, for you to understand that what kind of stage that sacred grove is. Then, so even if we are saying that it is being protected since generations, many times they are not in its ultimate climax stage. We'll also understand what climax is. Then the species, they thrive in the ecological services which are provided by sacred groves to human beings. And then there are a few stories. I'll just take you through these success stories of conservation and restoration. So obviously all of you know this, that these are holy groves. So obviously these are really thick forest patches, and means most of the places they don't disturb it beyond a certain point. So even if there are certain taboos, these are totally protected by local communities, because local communities feel that this fear is there or some kind of respect is there. Out of that, the sacred groves are being protected. And of course there are many traditions attached to that, so it has got certain cultural values along with, of course, spiritual and ecological value. So for us, the sacred groves are just like museum of biodiversity, because even if it is getting protected from some other reason, the outfall is ecological conservation of so many special species that will anyways go through that. When so just with the help of a case study from northern western ghats. So obviously these are like ancient. So, and this, all this is from secondary data. You can also read about it. There are a number of research paper that the history dates back to ancient pre-agrarian hunting gathering era. Yeah. So since then there was this tradition to protect this. Then a lot of work was done by Kosambi. Again, if you have gone through the secondary literature. So before humans had settled down to raise livestock or till the land when they started agriculture, the presence has been documented since early 1800s. So, but of course, now with the help of carbon dating and a number of other techniques, you can tell that sacred groves have been there since maybe 4,000 years or even before that, pre-Vedic times maybe. Yeah, and so we have this good history. Even if you look at our various literature like Vruksha Ayurveda, or there is the Skanda Puran. So in all of this, they have maybe not very proactively but indirectly talked about the protection of the sacred groves or about planting certain species. Yeah, so the history date backs to that kind of period. So, so there is this shlok in Sanskrit, Ashwathamekam, Pichumandekam, Ashwatha, Pichumandam, all these are various ficus species. Vyagrodhamekam, Dashachinchinincha means what? You should plant one people, one banyan tree, and Dashachinchinincha is like 10 tamarind species. Kapitha Bilva, Amalakatrayancha means all these species you should plant three each. Kapitha is Kapitha, Bilva is Bale, that is Agel. And Amala, again you know Amla. And Panchamra Mutva, Narakam na Paschet. So the people who would plant or conserve all these species, they would not enter uh, hell. So that's the kind of literature is there, which is there in India. So obviously history dates back to ancient and pre-Vedic times. The distribution is all over country, as you know it better than me now, because now each of you is studying this. And obviously rich culture there in Northeast, you must have studied this. But it's also good to know that most of the sacred groves are there in high rainfall areas. At least, definitely in Maharashtra, whatever sacred groves we have is in the region of more than 3,000 millimeters of average annual. There are hardly any sacred groves which are in low rainfall areas. So, I would like to hear from you, if at all you know any other stories from low rainfall arid region, different local names in different states. There are more than 13,000 sacred groves in India as per this particular paper by K.C. Malhotra. So you can definitely read this particular paper, Cultural and Ecological Dimensions of Sacred Groves in India. Wonderful. There are many research papers. One of them is by Madhav Gadge and Vartak. You can read that. So this is how sacred groves look like. So if you have visited, you would know. But those who have not visited, this is how it looks like. So hardly any sunlight reaches the forest floor. And these are the kind of deities. And this is the wonderful thing about sacred groves that I really love. So there is, means you can't even call it as a temple. This is just some kind of stones, and maybe even if whatever god or goddesses are there, they are just mounted on some kind of, so they just carved. So this particular is a the name of this deity is Waghoba. In Marathi, Wag is tiger. So as you see the Wag, that tiger is carved out on these planks of some wood, which is local wood, and then they respect it. And again, it's very interesting. This particular photograph is from Jawhar in Thane district of Maharashtra. And then say these local people say that why they started this particular tradition of sacred groves is so when for the first time in this Jawhar region, when it was full of forest and there were hardly any human being, only tribals. So when tribals came in this particular landscape for the first time, they had to clear the forest and then maybe make their settlement and maybe build their huts. So that time they had to clear the forest. So that's why they said that because we were clearing the forest little away from forest, we ultimately established such kind of sacred groves just to protect this tiger, because this land originally belongs to tiger, and because we have entered their home, so it's good that we protect one particular part of this landscape completely for them. So it's a nice gesture we felt when we heard that particular story. And that's how wherever you see settlement in this Jawar area, so you see there are certain sacred grove patches which are completely protected after this deity, that is tiger. Yeah. And at the most, there is this, maybe this is recent tradition, modern, that they have such kind of temple. Just again the stones are there and some kind of mangalore tiles are there. So nothing very great built up that you see in sacred grove. So this is that Jawhar and Vikramgarh, where for the first time we had surveyed the 16 sacred grove. And that was quite a wonderful case study for us to study all these and to know the associations of the sacred groves with local people, and also know the conservation status of all of this. Again, the same shrine. So in every sacred grove, you have almost the same kind of wooden, what you can say, emblem is there. So there is sun, there is moon, and then tiger. So all these things are carved over there. So the taboos and its relevance. So again, from ecological point of view, ban on cutting of trees obviously ensures that canopy is intact. So the moment canopy is intact and there is hardly any sunlight reaching the ground, the microclimate is maintained. So microclimate is extremely important from ecosystem point of view, because the moment you cut the trees, sunlight reaches the bottom and the temperature gradient changes very fast. So the species which come in the earlier low temperature microclimate are completely different than the species which grow in sunlight. So that's why each of this taboo has a role to play to maintain the ecosystem. Taboo on flower plucking. So why this taboo is there? Because ultimately, if you pluck the flowers, so we say the flowers are reproductive organs of the plant. So if you take away all reproductive organs of the plant, so the plant won't have fruits and seeds. So there would be no future generation. So you do. So if at all you wish to ensure that the forest should remain just like that, you should not just take away these particular flowers. And taboo on fruit plucking in the same story, because if you take away all the fruits from the forest, the seeds would not be there on the forest floor to germinate into the next generation of the forest. Yeah, and this germination is extremely important. Even I'm going to talk about it, how to document all this sacred growth, and that time you must um, document the regeneration. So whatever saplings are there in the understory, so from that you would know what is the future of that particular sacred grove. If that regeneration is completely absent, obviously you can say after 50, 100 years, 500 years, you may not see the same kind of sacred grove in the on that same place. So that's why each of this has got some significance. And ban on collection of dead wood, so it's not only about higher plants, but it also has to do with decomposers. So again, if you remember, or if you have taken the classes of, I'm sure you have the landscape students definitely have this subject ecology, because I teach here in BNCA. So in that you must have learned, I'm sure, that in ecosystem three components are there, or even we learn it in school days if you could revise. That is producers, consumers, and decomposers. So these decomposers are extremely important, and this dead wood is the food for all these decomposers. They continuously decompose, degrade this dead wood, and the nutrients are made available to the higher plants. So that recycling is ensured just because of these decomposers. And because of all these taboos and relevance, this is feeding the ecosystem loops. And the recycling is possible just because of all of this. So apparently, many times people look at all these taboos negatively, but obviously it has been helping the ecosystem. Yeah. Then, very importantly, the most important ecological significance is it is preserving the climax forest. So, climax, to a certain extent, many times many ecologists don't prefer to use this term, but instead of that, many scientists use mature uh, this particular term. They use mature term. So the once any forest is completely protected, when any human interference is removed, that time that ecosystem reaches a stable stage. That is called as climax stage or a mature stage or obvious mature stage. So in a given climatic condition, so say for example, if you are in Bengal, so in Bengal the kind of rainfall you have got, elevation you've got. So as per that, if you remove human interference, the ecosystem on its own reaches a certain stage. Yeah, it is stable at that level. So obviously that equilibrium is dynamic. So there are certain technicalities to it, but it doesn't changes very often. Yeah, so the way you particularly see in this particular photograph. So this stable stage, you have to assess that if that particular stable stage is reached by that sacred grove on your project site. So many times it happens that this is called as many times, so technically these are primary successional areas, means for the first time in the history of Earth, this kind of forest is formed and no one has obviously disturbed it. But as you know, human interference is there almost everywhere. So even if they're not cutting the trees, they definitely interfere to a certain extent. And in many of the sacred groves, even if I've narrated certain taboos, most of the sacred groves they allow to take whatever is fallen on the forest floor. So even if they're not allowed to pluck any fruit from the tree, whatever is fallen, they definitely take it away. So some kind of human interference is there. And because of this, obviously, this primary forests are degraded to secondary. So some kind of little different stage is achieved. So we have to look at it that what kind of interference was there since so many years. So you can assess that. And then Why it is important, climax forests are just because they are excellent reference ecosystem. So when the rest of the area is completely in a degraded stage, so that time this climax forest makes sense, referring as a reference ecosystem, so that you know what you need to restore, what you need to conserve. And this is how the stratification is there in most of the sacred groves. The ground layer is there, then lower canopy is there, medium canopy is there, mature old growth species are there, and then emergents are there. Along with that, definitely northern western ghats, another indicator is lianas. So lianas are woody climbers. They are not very delicate climbers like we see jasminum or the things that we see in urban areas, but they are really very huge. They are quite scary also. They grow all over the canopy, and that's how the even the shade is maintained on the forest floor. So obviously, to take those big climbers up in the forest canopy, huge trees are required with huge girth. Yeah, so old growth trees are there, and this is how they look like. So this is one of the sacred grove nearby Pune in Mulshi catchment, and these trees are ficus species, Ficus nervosa. It is called, and Ficus nervosa is a very special species seen only in this sacred grove. So these old species are there because again, just because they are preserved since many years. So these are the buttress roots. These are called as buttress, Buttress, buttress. So these are support roots because these trees are so tall. So obviously they need to have some kind of support structure. So if you measure the girth, so that's what actually even you can see that we were doing the same kind of exercise. So you actually take a tailoring tape and measure the girth. So you can't hug this tree. So you need 4 or 5 people to hug such kind of trees. Very wonderful trees. Then these are the lianas, as you see, which are growing in this particular forest. And this is called as entada. Entada is a big climber from it's a kind of Fabaceae family, and very huge pod. So almost of my height, 4 5 feet long pod is developed. Yeah, so extremely rare liana that way, seen in only in sacred groves or in protected forest patches. Yeah, so this is how it looks like. So yes, so I'm showing you all this, so you should be able to relate all this to your own area. So try to find out species whatever are special in your area. So this is how the climbers grow, huge woody climbers. Then straggling fig is another character of the sacred grove. So if you see the black bark behind this white bark is the host tree, and this white bark is of one of the ficus species, which is growing over it. So it straggles, so it slowly strangles on that particular tree, covers it up completely, and then kills the host tree. So this is an excellent association that you see. So there are many ficus species, but these ficus are again called as keystone species in any ecosystem. Yeah, why? Because many of the, say for example, bird fauna is dependent on the fruits of this ficus species. Yeah. So this is how it looks like. Very much characteristics of sacred grove. And then this word is very important, that is endemic. So if you know this particular uh, mammal, do you know? Anyone, can you answer? What is this mammal?
Flying squirrel, no?
No, not flying squirrel.
The Malabar squirrel.
Yes. So this is Malabar giant squirrel. Yeah, it's a very huge squirrel. Looks like very cute looking soft toy like squirrel, but extremely what you can say rare and endemic. What is endemic? Is restricted to only one particular area in Western Ghats. You don't see all over. So there are maybe subspecies which are there all along the Western Ghats, but this one is from northern Western Ghats. Yeah. So any species which is restricted to one particular area is called as endemic. So now when you go in field, try to assess your sacred grove. So that time you should just list down the species which are endemic to that particular area. And if that sacred grove is home to such endemic species, worth conserving them or actually enhancing the habitat for them. Then I also call it as a, so of course this term is there, but habitat specialist species. So habitat specialist species means what? They are very special. They are not general species that you see elsewhere in the degraded landscape. Yeah. So whatever habitat specialist species are there in your sacred grove, be it flora or fauna, you must document all of this. So you can take help of any local naturalist or botanist. So what you can do whenever you go to visit your site, so just try to contact any local naturalist, botanist, zoologist, anyone, and take him or her along with you so that they can introduce you to all the species, because otherwise it's difficult for you to identify all the species. And without identifying the species, it's very difficult to assess any ecosystem. So biodiversity is so much of integral part of any ecosystem that you must first identify those species and then list down, then try to analyze them, and then come up with a plan to conserve them. So that's the first thing that you should be doing, yeah, as a part of your survey. Then just to tell you, take you quickly through this sacred groves in northern Western Ghats. This is how they look like. Yeah, so as I told you, almost um, complete 99% canopy is there, as you see in these particular photographs, and just few pockets are there where sunlight reaches the bottom, and mostly they are in upper reaches. So this is a very typical Western Ghats landscape, and where the star is in upper reaches, you see all this sacred grove. They are little unaccessible, and that's why they are protected also. And obviously, as you see, the rest of the surroundings completely degraded. Open patches are there. Yeah, just because of years of cultivation and many other things. Then these are the special species that you see. Yes. So in this sacred groves, so you can look at biodiversity as an indicator. So those of you who are interested in birds, maybe, or you have been doing bird watching, you can relate to this particular slide. So all these four types of birds you don't see there in Bhopal or in any of the cities. Yeah, these are there only in sacred grove. So the first on the left hand side is Shama, a beautiful bird who's got beautiful song. Then second one is crimson backed sunbird. So the sunbird that you see in cities, even right now, if you just look through your windows and if at all there are any tree species around you, sunbird is the most common species all throughout the India. Yeah. But the sunbird that you see in the cities is different from this particular one in the sacred groves. And this black bulbul is there. Bulbul is also very common. It's there everywhere. But this one is black bulbul with this red beak. Then this paradise flycatcher with long tail. Yeah, all these are very special birds. I'm just wish to just give you this glimpse of this special biodiversity, which could be there in the sacred groves that you're studying. So you need to find it out that what all species are there. Then these are the species, tree species. So this is Mimecilon species, which is there in Western Ghats. Then the foliage that you see is of Democarpus. Then this the third one, that is a Fansada, which is a Garcinia species. As all of you must be knowing, kokum, that is Garcinia indica that we use in kitchen. So it's the same the species, the genus is the same. So this is how the special plants are, which are there in southern Western Ghats. And again, the birds, when it comes to birds, again, we've seen the yellow broad bulbul, Malabar whistling. So along with the thrushes and the flycatchers that we've seen, all these different types of birds are there. Yeah, so owls are there. Then this great pied hornbill. So on the right hand side, what you see, the big beak. Yeah, so in northeast it is definitely very common, but also in Western Ghats this is a very big bird. And obviously, all these birds can't thrive in open patches. So the importance of all this biodiversity, that the sacred groves in a degraded landscape is the only home left for them. So when you wish to study ecology, the first thing that you should be doing is listing, looking at all the species and understand the association. Same is the case with butterflies. So whatever interests you, you can just deep dive into that particular taxa, be it plants, be it butterflies, be it birds. So just try to relate to all the species and make a list of it, or mammals, for example. Like this giant squirrel or sambar is there, or this wild dogs are there. n number of representative mammals could be seen in Western Ghats. So this is how you should just do the same documentation for your sacred grove that you're studying. So what is the importance of the sacred groves? Again, the all the faunal species get distributed throughout its stratification. Yeah. So so there is this top canopy, middle canopy, lower canopy in the field layer that we've seen in the earlier slides. So these microbes are there in the soil, the topsoil layer, and they're degrading the organic matter, dead animals and leaf litter continuously. Then there are mammals which are there in the lower canopy, which enjoys the shade, and also maybe that depend on the fruits from the trees, like deers, for example. Then on this bark, you see a number of bugs and insects are there. And these are eaten by obviously many birds who are residing in this particular canopy, middle canopy. There are certain birds which are very shy, so they are seen little towards upper canopy, like this one, oriole, golden oriole, which is seen in most of the sacred groves in Maharashtra. Then there are mammals like monkeys who love fruits. Uh, then ultimately top story is occupied by these mammals like maybe Malabar giant squirrel, or even many eagles reside in this particular top canopy. Many honeycombs, beehives can be seen in this topmost canopy. So as you see, this entire stratification is used by various species. Yeah? Again, you can do the same kind of documentation for your own sacred grove, that what all species are using what all things. So then try to list down the species and try to know the association. Say, for example, this particular apex species, not apex species, but keystone species, this giant squirrel, it uses very peculiar or very few species for its nesting and few species for feeding. So these associations are there. So even amongst old growth species, it uses very few species for nesting. Say, for example, so there could be many Udupi restaurants in Pune, but I prefer only few. Yeah, so even if there are many mango trees in any forest, this giant squirrel prefers only few individual, so which tastes good or maybe which offers a fantastic canopy or the branching pattern in a certain way. So there are n number of things to observe. So once you sit in go and sit in the sacred grove for the entire day, you can just observe n number of life forms using various canopy layers. So that's what I suggest. Maybe you go visit the sacred grove. Of course, you keep on documenting, but someday you should just sit still in at various locations in that particular sacred grove and try to observe how all these non-human beings are using this particular sacred grove. And this is very important that all these species are natives and ultimately they are achieving this ecological balance in that particular ecosystem. So the moment non-natives are there, obviously this balance get disturbed. That we'll talk when we talk about the threats. So obviously this is how the sacred groves are. Unfortunately, they are surrounded by completely different land use. So again, this is one of the sacred grove nearby Pune from Tamini area. So immediately it has some kind of open area, sometimes paddy fields are there. So there is complete ecotone which is formed. So what is the importance of this sacred grove? So along with the home for all the species that we talked, it also has certain services, like it stops soil erosion. So the moment you remove this forest cover, obviously soil is loose and gets washed. It also conserves water resources. So sacred groves act like a sponge. It absorbs all the rainwater, and most of them are perennial water sources. Like even if in India we have monsoon, so all the streams and rivers they go dry after monsoon, or whatever base flow is there, it is maintained just because of such kind of sponges which are there on the slopes or on the mountain tops. Yeah? They contribute to the base flow. So during monsoon, maybe the streams are flowing with full velocity, but after monsoon, this is kind of base flow. So which is maintained by the sacred groves. They give out water. So there is this theory that this species plants, they absorb water and they give out water. So they're not scientifically proven though, but of course geology plays a very important role here. But also plants play a very important role in holding the water and releasing them. So this is another kind of sacred grove from Panchat catchment in Pune, and these local people, they're the stakeholder here because they have been protecting this particular sacred grove. So if you talk to local people when you visit your sacred grove, you will hear n number of stories. Yeah, you just talk to them, just have 2 hours interview with local community so that you get to know many facts about the sacred groves. Yeah, and then you also get to know the relation, ecological significance. Then this is the base flow that I'm talking about. Base flow is extremely important in river ecology, though it's not today's topic. So in this, the entire biota is dependent on this particular base flow after in drier periods, basically. Yeah, extremely important. Then there are certain in-stream pools are formed. So this is one of the sacred grove. This is a part of one sacred grove in Panchet catchment. And why I'm showing this to you, because of this, there is this taboo. This taboo says that women should not go to this sacred grove. So obviously, why they should not go? Because if women go, they would start washing clothes and washing utensils, and obviously that pollutes the water. But just because women don't go there, and even local people, they remove their chappals somewhere in, and then they go barefoot to this particular pools, and the result is this kind of species. So this is a mahasir, one of the very important fish from Western Ghats, and it is breeding quite heavily in this particular in-stream pool, which is this particular sacred grove is there in Tekpole, one of the village in Panchet catchment. Yeah. So this is how taboos have been helping. Then leaf litter is extremely important. So because it is not removed and it just stays there, excellent indication of protected ecosystem is spongy layer. So when you walk in your sacred grove, that time you should feel that you are almost walking on a spongy layer. So that's very important against food for microbes, as we talked, and also it insulates the soil to certain extent. There are n number of fungi species in the microbes and invertebrates like earthworms. So this is food for them. Yeah. So when we're talking about all tree species and animal species, decomposers are equally important. So this is how the now the islands of this sacred groves are remaining. So that's why it makes sense to develop buffer for them. Then they also offer certain non-timber forest produce to local people and of course to urban citizens. So, so do you know this species? Anyone? What are these leaves?
Is it
Hmm.
bay leaves?
Yeah, bay leaves, cinnamon leaves. So many of the sacred groves has this cinnamon tree, specifically in Western Ghats. All the sacred groves or the protected forest has this Cinnamomum zeylanicum is the species which is growing wild, and this is traded, yeah, all over India. So they take the leaves and local people get some kind of value, good price for that. Along with that, this is another species which is also traded from sacred groves. Anyone knows this?
Ratti we call over here in MP.
In
Oh, like it was earlier used for as a weighing unit.
ah, right.
Gold.
Gold. To weigh the gold, this is, was used in Marathi. We call it as gunza, and this particular leaves are also used in uh, by many of the pan shop. The pan that we eat, so the leaves are put into that. They are very sweet, and the seeds are called as crab's eye. Yeah. So this is, I think, crab's eye wine in English. So very important species. Though the seeds are extremely poisonous, of course, if you eat just one seed, it's not that poisonous. If you eat many seeds, then it is poisonous. But very important medicinal species, yeah, gunza in Marathi. Abrus precatorius is the scientific name. Then this is one of the tubers, Dioscorea. Yeah, of course, this is medicinal and also it is there in the diets of local people. So there is certain certain, what you can say, procedure which goes into making of some kind of dish. Yeah. Again, one of the species is Mucuna species. The seeds are eaten, and most of the species they grow on the edge of the forest. Yeah. So this particular thorny species, yeah. So they obviously try to restrict human beings to from entering the sacred grove. But anyways, the human interference is being there. So many of the species are traded as non-timber forest produce. Then even the shikikai, yeah, Acacia cancina is the species. Again, this has got huge lianas. And as you must be knowing that even in earlier days, definitely I used to use continuously, I don't use soap, but I prefer to use shikikai and rita powder as soap and just to wash my hair. So this comes to cities from all these sacred groves nearby Pune. This is Hirda. Hirda is another medicinal species which is called as a myrobalan tree, traded. Yeah. In Sanskrit, there is this shlok in which they say, Nasti yasya gruhe mata, tasya mata haritaki. So, Hirda in Marathi, but haritaki in Sanskrit. So, in the homes where there is no mother, unfortunately, so for them, for all those kids, haritaki is the mother. So, that's the kind of importance of this Hirda is. Yeah. So again, I'm just showing you the glimpse. All these things you need to find on your own when you're going to study all the sacred groves. So if you look at the stresses, so this is how the sacred groves are. So just like island, everything else is degraded. Most of the areas are open, or the rest of the green color, as you see in this particular slide, the vegetation in this surrounding is completely different than the vegetation which is within this particular sacred grove. Yeah, so that's why it's worth studying. It's also worth comparing both. You can also do that. So whatever is growing outside the sacred grove and whatever is growing inside the sacred grove, then try to come up with the management strategy. So this is how it is. Most of the areas they are cultivated. So this is a photograph of shifting cultivation patch in northern Western Ghats. So they cut the forest, they burn it, and then they grow 3 hill millets for 3 consecutive years. That is Nachini, Varai, and Til. These are the 3 millets that they grow in these areas, and just because of that, they have been cutting the forest. So that is one of the stress in this northern Western Ghats area. Then obviously also so this is the photograph again from one of the sacred groves. As I told you, so now this particular new generation they no more believe in this kind of what you can say taboos. They clearly fail the sacred groves and sell it to outside contractors. So this is one of the photograph again from northern Western Ghats, that a part of sacred grove was completely chalked, and this is how it was stacked, and we were really wondering that how the traditions are changing so fast. Yeah. But again, let me tell you, there are also certain stories from Western Ghats wherein, so that's why I told you that you should talk to local people. So this is just reminding me of one of the stories from Panchet catchment, from Panchet. So there is this dam named Panchet near Pune. And in that, there is very huge sacred grove, almost spread over 40-50 acres, Mandgaon, in a village Mandgaon. And that time, so they had, so this next generation, they sold the sacred grove to the contractors from Pune. Yeah. And this earlier generation, the elderly people were warning this younger generation not to cut it, the sacred grove, otherwise that God will punish them. And obviously, this younger generation was completely ignoring this statement, and they said, no way. So they called in this contractor, he came, and they started filling the sacred grove. So the same day, so entire day they were trying to cut, and that time this kind of huge machinery was not there. So this contractor got labor, and he was trying to cut this just one single old growth tree which was there at the edge of this forest. And the same night, the entire this labor and the contractor was staying in the village outskirts, and that contractor, he was just facing some problem in the health, and he died same night. So obviously the reason was not all of us know that God didn't punish them. So something went wrong with his health, and he was suffering from some kind of dysentery and maybe vomiting, and he just died in the same village that day. So obviously, immediately the entire work was switched off, because then even younger generation, they thought that there's something maybe that goddess is done to this contractor, and maybe thanks to the death of that contractor, I always say that the huge sacred grove is still standing in the Panchit catchment. So these are the stories that you hear from all these local people. Then another threat is dissection of the sacred grove, as you see in this photograph. So the road is taken through the middle of this particular sacred grove. Obviously, it is dissecting the core of the grove. In ecosystem, when we study forest ecosystem, we study it with respect to core and the buffer. So there are these two zones. So if at all there is something which is dissecting the core of the sacred grove, it is going to get impacted on the biodiversity. Then this is the photograph of famous Ambi Valley. So if you know the Ambi Valley project nearby Pune, yeah, established by Subrat Roy. So there are many sacred groves in these landscapes, and this is how they are in a very much pathetic state. So this is the origin of River Mura, which flows through Pune city and ultimately meets River Bhima, one of the very important tributary of River Bhima. But the origin is like this. So many developmental pressures are there. And that's why I think it makes sense for architects to study this, because if at all you're shaping or designing any township in such a fragile zone of rivers, at the source region of rivers, it's our duty to maybe know the importance of all these ecosystems and sacred groves, and then shape it in an appropriate way. So that's why there is this need of conservation. So these are certain two projects where we worked, and conservation strategy and management techniques. I'll just quickly go through it, and then we'll discuss on your project side. So revival of natural processes is very important, and then you can do the zoning as I've shown in this particular. So you must identify the core zone of sacred grove. Also, you can't neglect that these local people need to use the sacred grove, because there's been culture which is associated with that. So on certain days they would go in sacred groves. Many times certain communities actually cook food within the sacred grove, and there is this Gav Jevan in Marathi, we call it as. Means what? The feast is offered to the entire village. So all village community gathers in the sacred grove and they eat, and then they disperse. So there are very few days in a year where such kind of function happens. So you need to allocate certain space for them. So obviously you need not landscape it, but leave aside certain space for that. Means I mean to say that from the same sacred grove, if you protect rest of the area and leave out certain area just for this activity, it makes sense, because most of the sacred grove are in a degraded stage. And of course, you need to develop buffer. Many times this buffer is completely lacking. Yeah, so by having some kind of plantation of native plants, which would not disturb the core of the sacred groves immediately, if at all there is any threat like fire, for example, then you need to protect it. Complete protection is extremely important, because earlier all this social fencing was working. So if the villages decide that this area needs to be protected, no one would enter that area or let the cattle graze. But nowadays, because such a heterogeneity is there even amongst the villages, so it's good to have such kind of fence. So maybe, as you see in this photograph, dry fence or some live hedge you can have. Then protection to the surrounding of the sacred grove. So restoration of buffer area surrounding the sacred grove is very important. So that definitely you can have you can design the restoration activities, you can have plantation of natives, you can do habitat creation in this particular area. So these are just few photographs from earlier projects, that this is how soil and moisture conservation can be done. So which arrays the soil behind the bunds, then moisture percolation definitely gets improved. Riparian zone, that is zone along both the sides of the stream. So if at all your sacred grove has stream, starting the work from the stream is very important. This is how the changes are. So apparently, even if you feel that all the three photographs are looking almost the same, but at a minute level there is a difference. And why I'm showing you these slides, this is from one of the project restoration site from Western Ghat. So restoration and conservation that way is a very slow process if resources are completely degraded. So in the first year, if you look at this particular soil, completely brown, hardly any organic matter is there. And slowly, because of protection, now organic matter has started growing on it. So that's why protection is extremely important. And of course, plantation of native plant, I think I did not talk about natives. All of you must be knowing. So if at all you have any questions about natives, I'll answer that. Then establishment of connectivity. So this is very important. Corridor development, again, another important thing from ecosystem management point of view. But I'm not sure if I start talking about it again, I'll consume a lot of time. But corridor development, I'll maybe explain it to you when I talk about one of the project. So this is one of the sacred grove in which we had proposed. So we had done the zoning. So core is um, located, and right now, so the green patch, as you see in this particular schematic drawing, so green patch is the only patch where the sacred grove is standing. Yeah. And the rest of the complete, so the orange boundary, as you see, the rest of it is completely degraded. Yeah, so here we couldn't have the strategy of core in the center and surrounded by buffer, because the buffer, the ownership is quite different here. Yeah. So then these are different things that we did: slope stabilization, plantation, live hedge along the pathway. So it's very important that you keep only one single pathway to walk through the sacred grove instead of maybe 10 different pathways. So that's very important. Then, and this was decided along with the community. So actually, um, I always say that this is the problem with all, what you can say, architectural colleges in the syllabus, that you have to complete your thesis whatever within very short period of 2 months, 6 months. So, but when it comes to work in such a kind of sacred groves, this particular project went in for 3 years. So, first year completely went into understanding the sacred grove, biodiversity, then meetings with local people, and by the end of the year, we came up with this plan. So, obviously, maybe I can't expect you to come up with such kind of planning within some just 1 or 2 visits, but you need to keep on visiting the sacred grove many times. Yeah, understand it, sit with local people. You have grama sabhas. So in those grama sabhas, you put up this particular subject, that how you wish to do the conservation of sacred grove. So even the pathway that you can see, very easy to draw on map, but it was quite easy to implement on ground, because we had to ultimately convince these local people that this is what we need to do. And also we need to convey the importance of having just one single pathway instead of multiple pathways. So yeah, so obviously all these things take time. So first year went into planning, and slowly all these things, as you see in the letter blue or light blue and this purple color, so these were taken phase wise, and very slowly within 3 years we completed this work. Yeah. So it takes time for sure. So that's so the time constraint we have in such syllabus, obviously. Then this is another sacred grove from some other area. So here they were blessed with a riparian zone, the blue zone that you see. So we could work on that particular zone also. And the temple, again, one single pathway was kept, and the core and buffer was adjusted as per the existing land use. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to show you, the corridor in between two patches. So in one of the areas in Jawahar, these two patches of sacred grove are there, so close to each other. So obviously earlier they must have been connected, but the now connectivity is lost, just because, as you see in this slide, that agriculture is now predominant here. And so we decided to have such kind of corridor on the edges of the field, and we convinced again in Gram Sabha these local people that they should have at least 2 rows of trees on their bunds, so that some kind of connectivity can be established and both the patches are able, maybe being used by many mammal species. But again, this was a conceptual thing. So when it comes to actual implementing, sorry, this is in Marathi and many of you may not be understand this, but this kind of signages were developed just to talk about the objectives, why you need to protect the sacred grove. And this was a joint project with BIF, one of the organization which works, obviously they work at a national level also, and Praj, one of the industries in Pune. So they had funded this project. So it was a tripartite arrangement in between Oikos, BIF, and Praj. Yeah, so the corridor, as you see in this particular signboard, which was also installed in the same sacred grove. So we couldn't have it continuously, but the only village, the owners or the farmers who agreed to do plantation, only those could get implemented ultimately. So this is how it was. So that's why this is very important. So maybe if at all, because the funding was there only for 3 years, we could convince only these many farmers. And little bit of work was done, but obviously, if at all you have good funds, you can maybe compensate farmers for their land uh, for this particular purpose of objective of conservation, maybe. So this is how you can do planning. This is how it is. For those who can read Devanagari or Marathi, this is all Harita Patta is corridor. And then these two forest patches are there, which has obviously green is all core area and yellow is buffer zone. Yeah. So yeah, so another important thing that I missed in this presentation are threats. So what kind of threats could be there even in your project area is uh, invasive species. So many times invasives take over the understory in many sacred groves. Yeah, so uh, like one of the invasive species is Ran Mari. So Ran Mari is Ran is forest and Mari is kills. So many times this invasive species spread so much in the forest floor that they completely suppress the native vegetation. So that's why when you go to your sacred groves area, that time look for, if at all any non-native invasive species is trying to take over. That time you need to have this management strategy of removal of those particular invasive species. And for that, as I told you, you need to take help of some naturalist or local person at least to understand the species really well. Yeah, so I think I'll stop here and maybe I'll take the questions.
So, yeah, very interesting presentation and insightful presentation about sacred groves. Even though I have started reading so much, but I found it so much meaningful how you have weaved the various layers of like the components and the various within the identified the relationships between the various elements. So
True.
I definitely like I'm sure many of our students would be having questions. So I request you all to one by one kindly unmute yourself and like interact.
Okay. I just said that we are very thankful to you for giving such a wonderful presentation, enlightening presentation to our students. And since we are dealing it for the first time in, say, in our life, in my lifetime, means first time dealing with sacred groves, and for me it's very learning experience, and maybe we will able to do little justice to this particular exercise, and maybe Sonal will also help us in moving ahead with this. And we look forward to many such interaction during our this journey this for this exercise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
a question by Ramesh Bhole sir. How the various government schemes are changing the belief systems? What is the role of government-led schemes?
How the various government schemes changing the belief system. Yeah, so not sure with how government systems are changing, but generally the modernization is changing the belief system. So not able to answer. Let me think. So government schemes, say for example, many times, like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Uh, okay. Yeah, obviously, so such kind of government scheme, they actually are maybe acting like a seed for aspirations. So they are made maybe believing that whatever house they have, earlier traditional house, is not so good, but they should go in for some kind of modern amenity. And during that process, obviously, the landscape changes completely. So earlier, whatever traditional practices that they would have, they get changed. And many times, this kind of ecological thought is lacking in such kind of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Yeah, so all the obviously all external materials they get in, they hardly think about the local climate. Means at least I have not seen any architects or planners getting involved, or good planners and good architects getting involved in such kind of schemes. So if at all they involve some sensitive architects, then there are chances that even we might see good government schemes getting implemented nearby sacred groves or in rural areas. But unfortunately, no, you don't see. It's very typical kind of schemes which are getting involved, which are getting implemented. Why most of the sacred groves located near river banks? So obviously, if you know, since ancient times, means since hunting gatherings times, man would love to reside by river because it's an excellent source of water, and mostly again perennial water source, not necessarily river banks, but many sacred groves are near springs. Yeah, so obviously it's a good resource for nearby human beings. And sacred groves ultimately are getting protected out of belief of local people. So that's why they have been protecting the water resources just for their own use. That's why they are near river banks. Then, do you want to develop and consume our natural and cultural heritage resources today, protect them so that future generations can use them, or establish long lasting protection for both current and absolutely Snehal? That's what is the idea. So, so till this time, what was happening that the local people were protecting the sacred groves, um, just out of some belief, yeah, just even out of some kind of orthodox tradition. But now what you're saying is very much correct, that maybe if you look at it from science point of view, from this planning point of view, from conservation point of view, even for that matter architectural planning, so all these are quite modern fraternity. So by maybe connecting both this, the traditional and the modern practices, you can actually can create some kind of better future for next generation. So um, you have to understand it now meaningfully and then implement it instead of just blind protection. It makes sense that you actually put in some kind of cautious and conscious effort into that, so wherein you can have better future for future generation. Obviously, how can we deal with the shift in religious belief system? Is it possible to stick on taboos in the religious system to conserve the sacred groves in no? So that's why I'm telling that it's no more possible. Now the next generation knows that these taboos are just some kind of belief which can be broke very easily, and you can get money for that. So that's why you need to convince them from science background, that why, or from ecology background, why it is important for you to protect these resources which are going to be helpful in long term, yeah, for many future generations. So if you protect, for example, one particular sacred grove, it's almost acting like a sponge because it is holding water resource. So say for example, you can compare it to a modern amenity like dam. So if you have dam, if at all there is rainfall, then only your dam gets filled, and then you need a number of things like pumps and all these things. So but if at all you protect the water resource in the form of sacred grove, they are going to be there almost forever. Yeah. So it's important that maybe you tell them the relevance of these taboos, and instead of blind following, they should follow it little meaningfully. How does the change in ownership affect sacred groves? Absolutely affect, because if at all they sell the sacred groves, like in Western Ghats, if many sacred groves are private, yeah, so the first sacred grove that I showed you, which is there nearby Pune, it is owned by one of the Sane family in that Kondethar village. So now what they have done, though they have not sold the sacred grove itself, just adjacent to the sacred grove, the buffer area of sacred grove is sold to one of the developer who's making this typical plot development scheme, and I'm sure all architects know that how it is done. Very crudely, they have just removed all the vegetation immediately in the buffer zone of the sacred grove, made it into very much rectangular kind of plots, and they're selling is a 3,000 square feet each, that plot is, and they're barbed wire fence, and it's such an ugly sight next to the sacred grove. So definitely ownership affects that. So if tomorrow this next generation of this Sane family feels like maybe getting good money for this 1 acre patch, so obviously it's going to get ruined. So ownership definitely affects the sacred grove. So what I should say, that because India is full of heterogeneity, yeah, so we have different kinds of people. So you can also see both the cases wherein ownership has offered protection and conservation is being done, and you also have enough cases wherein you can see the ownership is changed and it is degrading the sacred grove. Both the scenarios can be observed in a population like we have in India. So even many times, few sacred groves are acquired by forest department now. So forest department are able to offer good protection to the sacred grove, which otherwise could be absent when local people are owning it. But if you go to northeast, for example, it's only local people who have been protecting the sacred groves. So scenarios completely change as per the state, as per the psyche of local community in that particular place. So if you go to, for example, South India. So in South India, so there are these cows, they call it as Sarpila cow. So the some kind of sacred grove which is protected for some kind of snake like cobra, and local people have been protecting it. So even if it's with private ownership, good protection and conservation is offered. So I would suggest you, so wherever you go, you can't apply, you can't say that if the ownership is changed, it is going to degrade or protect the sacred grove. It means no one can assure that. It completely depends on that particular local scenario, whatever is there. So if at all, wherever you go, you study the cultural practices, the social setup. So say, for example, I've seen certain forests getting degraded just because there is no unity within the community, and just because casteism is there. So in India, certain parts of villages, they definitely have this kind of caste system, that few are superior, few are inferior, and just because of that, they don't come on the same platform to conserve any forest patch. So if at all such systems are there, then you have to tackle it very differently. Yeah? So many such challenges are there. So you need to document all of those. So ownership definitely affects that. Then what is the scale of sacred groves? Gayatri is asking, for example, is it a single tree, or what is the biggest sacred grove? Ma'am, if you're explaining about the temple, where is the location of the temple? Is it in the center? Is it under oldest tree? Yeah. So again, heterogeneous answers are there to the same question. That the scale of the sacred grove, I have seen one sacred grove, just one single tree. That's it. And it was teeming with wildlife like anything. Oh my God, it was full with life. It was having one single liner, it was having a number of orchids on it. So even one single tree could be sacred grove, and because of the maybe land use change, surrounding is everything is agriculture. So even single tree is there, or even the largest sacred grove that have been is, I think the only one which is near, or maybe, yeah, 50 acres, 100 acres sacred groves that we have in Western Ghats. Yeah, so it varies. And temple, yeah, many time it is in the core of the sacred grove, but sometimes it is also observed in the buffer, and not necessarily it is oldest tree. Yeah, so it is just that particular location. So I think very recently we have been to one of the sacred grove in Nashik district. So nearby Nashik. So yeah, so it was not an oldest tree. And again, as I shown you, those are just stones which are placed in one particular location. And yeah, so at least I have not seen any connection with the location of the temple and some kind of important ecological component of that sacred grove. No, don't know the logic where they located. Is it limited interference by local people desirable, or the sacred growth should be left to grow themselves? Yeah, the best thing is left to grow themselves, and human interference, if it is kept minimum. So if you look at the history of the sacred grove, these local people again, they would go only maybe whatever surveys that we have done, at the most once a month, not more than that. So once a month is like the maximum frequency that these local people would go. So on some kind of Purnima ki Raat, they would go just to maybe worship the goddess. Yeah. On some kind of full moon they go, or on in Diwali, one of the days Vasubaras, if you know. On that Vasubaras, many local communities go there. Or when they harvest the first produce. So when they say, for example, harvest the in tribal communities, when the fresh mango after Akshay Tritiya, somewhere in May or June, so that time they offer this first mango to this deity in the sacred grove, and then they eat it. Or when the first harvest of rice, so most of the areas it's growing rice in high rainfall areas, so they offer this first. What you can say, grains of rice to the deity, and then they eat it. So hardly any times they enter the sacred grove. So if we maintain the same frequency, instead of making them go every day, it's good that human are little away from this sacred groves. Then there are sacred groves even inside the forest areas. How can we define its boundary and how can we study it? Yeah, so normally sacred groves boundary is decided by local people because they are the one who have initiated this tradition. So by talking to them, even if it is within the forest area, you would know the boundary, I'm sure. Yeah. And how can we study it? Yeah, so you can take permission for forest department. So even if the ownership is changed from local community to forest department, you can just inform. So most of the time they definitely welcome it. That's what my experience is. There's no problem in getting permission. You have to just inform them. Some local DFO, divisional forest officer, or RFO is there. You can actually even take them along with you to the sacred grove, along with the local people who can show you the boundary. While documenting the sacred grove, are there any specific indicators to look for to trace the changes on site? Yeah, there could be many indicators, like say for example, waste is there, non-native species could be there, plantation could be there. So you can look for all such kind of things, and also invasive non-native. So say for example, there are many aster family group. So aster are very commonly planted in cities. So tagetes is one of them. So if at all you see such kind of plants, you can say that it is being changed. Yeah. Uh, Next again is, apart from the temple, is there any intangible heritage like dance, music, or festivals happening in the sacred grove? Yeah, of course. how these intangible aspects involve in sacred grove conservation. So because of all these things, they get associated with that particular sacred grove emotionally. Yeah. So even if so, dance is not going to get maybe some kind of good effect from ecological point of view, but because they are connected emotionally through dance and music and festivals, because they know that their first produce has to be offered to that particular goddess, so that's a respect that they pay. So that's how it makes sense to maybe continue with this kind of tradition. So even I remember when we had been to one of the Warli tribe, so just outside the Sacred Grove on one particular day. So many times dance and music doesn't necessarily happen within the grove, but on that particular day, when they worship the goddess within the sacred grove, they come back to uh, their settlement, and then they have this dance and music programs. Yeah, doesn't necessarily happen within the sacred grove. So, if at all elsewhere in India, if you have seen that that happens within the sacred grove, and if it's just for once or twice a year, they definitely can continue that. So they should means it should means what I can say, the practices should be kept to the minimal the way it was earlier. So sometimes it happens that they overburden the sacred grove. Like in few of the settlements now, they put on the speakers, yeah, and then they get in almost something like DJ. So that's not advisable. So because now the younger community, a younger generation, they don't know the earlier forms of music and dance. Like these Warli people that I was telling you, they have this beautiful dance. You should experience that sometime. I thoroughly enjoyed dancing with them. So there are very simple steps that they take, so they just make a circle and they hold the hands, and on a certain tune of certain musical instruments which are made locally, like one of them is tarpa, they dance. Yeah. So many times it happens with the modernization, now all these earlier traditions are fading away, and then and because electricity is there, they can put on the speakers and mics. So that's obviously quite detrimental to the local wildlife. So if the moment you have noise, many of the species just get displaced. They can't stay in that particular noise pollution and also light pollution. So these changes should not happen. Whatever traditional forms are there, if they are not disturbing the wildlife, they can be continued. Yeah. And so these are the intangible aspects, I think. So indirectly, these forms are protecting. The moment you change it to some kind of modern forms, obviously it's going to be detrimental. So this is how, again, this is the role of planner, that you identify it and at the same time make the local community understand that what is the importance of their traditional form of entertainment as compared to the modern form. Then Mayank is asking, ma'am, the environmental planners are working on how we can make an urban area or any nearby settlement most resilient by conserving sacred groves. Um, I'm not understanding your question, Mayank.
Ma'am, basically what we are trying to get is how can we bring in this beautiful concept of sacred groves in urban context? That's what we.
Yeah, so if it's the community is completely urban now, so the only thing remains is you have to protect that particular patch as for the sake of biodiversity, maybe. So even if that connect is not there in between urban areas and the sacred grove, so obviously if urban area is there, people are also urban, right? They are away from the traditional cultures that this local community were following. So at least in that case, it's a good to have such kind of forested areas which has a number of ecological services like microclimate regulation, or once in a while you can just go there, observe biodiversity and birds. So even for urban community, it makes sense to have such kind of forest nearby you. Yeah. So you just protect it just like some kind of heritage site. Is tourism being promoted and how is tourism managed? Yeah, so tourism again limited. So everything has to be very much limited within the vicinity of Sacred Grove. So that visitor management has to be there. Again, one single pathway must be followed. You should not enter core zone too frequently. Then number of visitors must be managed very well. Then there are a number of things in tourism, which again you can also follow the wildlife tourism which is happening in national parks and sanctuaries. Like, say for example, very little things are there, like you should have a camouflaging clothes while you go in the Sacred Grove, while you do bird watching. Yeah, you should not get any kind of, so no, there are restriction on noise pollution and light pollution. So even if you are taking a group, you are supposed to keep very silent while you are walking in the forest. Yeah, so some such kind of rules must be followed. Then whatever waste you are trying to create over there, just take it away. Yeah, don't just throw it over there. Many such rules, definitely. The conventional simple rules are there, that I think even if you brainstorm, you can come up with a list of all such activities. Then many times, say for in our sanctuaries and national parks, they are kept closed during breeding season of mammals, that is during monsoon. So the same thing can be followed if at all Sacred Grove is very big. By the groups for their sustenance, then how do we empathetically introduce control mechanisms? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. So, thanks to modernization, there are hardly any local people who are completely dependent on Sacred Groves for their sustenance. To a certain extent, there is partial sustenance is there. So, say for example, they take out medicinal plants. They use medicinal plant, and certain plants are also traded. So that time you can just again sit with them, advise them that why they need to go towards sustainability. So say for example, maybe we have tried to do the same thing with Bhima Shankar Wildlife Sanctuary. So Bhima Shankar Wildlife Sanctuary is um, so if any of you have visited that, so there is this temple within the sanctuary, and while you go towards temple, there are maybe hundreds of shops which are established by local people, and they sell medicinal plants which are harvested from the same forest, from the same sacred grove. That is Gupta Bhima Sacred Grove is there. So we convinced these local people. We had again series of meetings with them and convince them that they should plant all these medicinal plants instead of harvesting it from Sacred Grove, because ultimately, so even the same villagers were telling us that earlier this particular tuber, which was plentiful in at the time of their maybe when the elderly generation was selling it, and now it is scarce just because they kept on harvesting it. So then we obviously told them then it makes sense that you actually plant those and don't harvest those. So this is how you can have discussion with local people and just take them towards sustainability if at all they're dependent on that and if they're harvesting anything from the sacred grove. Yeah, then yeah, thank you, Rama. Is fencing is the only solution to demarking the boundaries and protection of spaces? Yeah, so fencing has to be nature friendly. You can have live hedges. You need not have compound walls or barbed wire fence, obviously. You can just have thorns. So on most of our projects, we use thorns. So through thorns, there is wildlife can move through. Yeah. So like wild boars and hares. So you can keep certain spaces also for them within that dry fence and live hedge, which is quite nature friendly. Huh? So you can allow that. And if at all you could follow social fencing, nothing like it. So if you convince local people, but what happens? We have free roaming cattle everywhere. So if cattle enter the sacred groves, obviously they eat up all regeneration and many things which are important. So and they are in good numbers, obviously, as compared to natural herbivores or wild herbivores. So like deers, if they come, they don't devastate the sacred grove to the extent our domestic cattle can. So for them, we need to have fencing. So if at all you don't have any such problem of cattle or local people are okay with it, you can definitely go with social fencing, not a problem. Yeah, so sometimes fences restrict tribals too. Yeah, so that's why all this planning needs to be done with the community who are protecting it. And if they are okay with it, so the way we have been working with the tribals, they are okay with the kind of fence that we suggest. Yeah, it's quite open fence, means definitely, and people can use the simple gate, right? They can open the. I think in this presentation those photographs were not there. Again, made by tribals only. Simple bamboo gate was there, or if not gate, at least the fence or some kind of barricade has to be there, which can't be crossed by cattle. So it's up to local that. So the what you can do, Stuti, that ultimately we wish to protect the sacred grove. You can convey this message to locals, and then locals can decide what kind of protection they wish to have. Yeah.
Uh, Ma'am, I have a site-specific question.
Hmm.
So, ma'am, my site is in Sarguja district of Chhattisgarh, specifically a part of Hasdev Forest, which is not just a biodiversity hotspot, but sits on million metric tons of coal. So, in the wake of industrialization, what has been seen over the years is that the religious beliefs and environmental aspects have been completely traded off for making the forest a site of coal mining. So
Oh.
I have identified few areas within the same vicinity, but I would like to know how do I proceed with the aim of conserving the site if there are political issues involved.
Yeah. So yeah, so in such cases it's quite difficult to handle it. But in that case, the best thing is you sit with or you talk to local corporators. So the politicians who are involved in it. So if you just talk with them, it makes sense, right? So whatever agenda they have. So it's most of the time these local politicians, they wish to push conventional development. That's why this kind of mining is there. So, if at all local people are positive about the mining, then there is hardly anything that we can do. Yeah, we can't do
Okay.
anything. So, look, it's people's choice, and we are outsiders that way.
Yeah.
Okay, but if at all local people are against this kind of development like mining, you can help them. Yeah, you can sit with them, you can tell them, and local people have all the rights. Means they can be, what you can say, protect their own sacred groves and their own area as community reserve. And definitely it is legitimate. Means by law they can, maybe they cannot, they means they can't be forced to have mine. If at all local people decide that they wish to protect their sacred grove, they can legally get it declared as community reserve. So you can help with local people in that case. But if at all local people wish to go with this development which is proposed by local politician, then my experience is um, hardly anything that we can do. So then there are
Okay.
many times two groups get formed within the same village, and one group is definitely for this mining and also developmental activities, and another group is for conservation kind of work. Yeah. So it depends how strong you are lobbying for this. So if at all there are good activists within your group and within the village, then there are chances that you can win and you can save the sacred groves from mining. So
Okay.
as I told you, there are both the stories in India. We have bad examples, we have good examples. So the
Okay.
entire thing depends on what kind of efforts we put in, what to what extent we can lobby for this for saving the sacred grove, and of course the heterogeneity or homogeneity within the local community. N number of things are there.
Okay. Ma'am, I would just like to share one interesting picture
Mm-hmm.
of the same site.
Yeah, please
So,
share.
yeah.
And then Guna, meanwhile, is asking, is it possible to do economic valuation of sacred groves to bring change in attitude and values? Yes, yes, of course. So there is this wonderful subject of economic valuation of ecological services or ecosystems. So if we do that, for sure, you will be able to convince economists or say politicians why they need to protect the sacred groves. But still in India, that particular subject of economic valuation is poorly developed. You can work on it, Guna. The land conflict. Oh. Yeah, Isha, you wish to explain this?
So, ma'am, in between there's a sacred grove which unfortunately now doesn't exist. This is a picture of 2019. Sacred
Oh,
grove under sal trees. So they
oh,
have displaced this and put made this into some other part of the forest. But now this is the situation. That is going on in this region. So they're removing the sacred groves from their original position to a different position to have the mining project by Adani Group.
oh my God.
So
So
there
that
has been, yeah, ma'am.
no, you complete. Then I'll talk.
There have been many protests also going on,
Hmm?
but yeah, I would just, uh, you know, wondering how do I proceed in a better way for this project, ma'am.
Yeah. So as I told you, it completely depends on the inclination of local community. If at all they wish to save it, they can save it. Yeah, so you can help them in saving or in getting it declared very much legitimately with the help of law. Can be done. Yeah, so you can
Okay.
maybe take help of some lawyer and just ask him or her for what is the procedure for getting it declared as a community reserve. And once it is protected by law, by judiciary, then no one can disturb it.
Okay, ma'am.
Try to explore that particular avenue of community reserve.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Priyanka is saying there is no deity, but they worship, Kanchenjunga as their god. The whole area in which the tribal inhabit is considered sacred. So, what could be the study region in particular in such a scenario? So, you are saying there is already one sacred grove is there, right? Priyanka, are you there?
Hello. Hello. Yeah, ma'am. So,
Oh,
ma'am, there is the lecture tribals out here. They are considered the inhabit of that area, and they are been there since they consider they have been there since the starting, and like they are the inhabitants of that place. And a monastery is there, but that is it is like 15 to 20 kilometers far away from that area, and they actually trek to that place to the monastery only during the festival. Like a particular festival is there, so only during that time they are allowed to visit the monastery.
hmm.
So what could be the study region in specific? I wanted to ask you,
So,
like
whatever
because
area
the
they
whole
are,
area.
yeah, whole area, of course, the whole area is sacred to them. So, obviously, you should consider the whole area.
Okay.
Hmm. So that's why I told you the moment you talk about sacred groves, the first people that you should take all such kind of information is by talking to local people. Ask them that how much is the uh, area that they suggest that you should take up for study. They're the best to suggest.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Good.
So,
Uh,
ma'am, I have a question.
yeah.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Ma'am, I have chosen Ratnagiri as a region, and Ratnagiri itself is a house of around 830 sacred groves, which is Devrais. And I have chosen Dapuli in particular as a taluka, and in Dapuli there are around 132 Devrais in it. So now we have to be a site specific topic. So, on what basis should I choose a Devrai? Because
You have to choose
all are sacred
one
groves.
Devrai, right?
Sorry, ma'am.
You have to choose one Devrai for your study,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, whatever. I mean, any sacred grove is good for study for me. There's nothing like this is good, this is bad. Anything that you take up is good for study. So, but if at all you wish, so there is this Keshavraj temple near Dapoli. Have you been there?
I haven't been there, ma'am.
So that is also good near Asode. Name of the village is Asode, and the why it's a good to have that particular sacred grove. Maybe I have not seen many sacred groves in Dapoli, but this is one of the good sacred grove wherein there is perennial water source. Again, these aspirations of local people are there. They wish to change the temple now to a certain extent. So the way I have been there 20 years back, so the sacred grove fairly in the same state, but few things have started changing. So this is what can be addressed by an architect, that how you can address the aspirations of local people and at the same time try to conserve the sacred grove. So you need to have some kind of integration, right? Otherwise, what happens? Many of the sacred groves, I didn't talk in this presentation, but most of the sacred groves, because they are owned by local community, and they have this aspiration to have big temple in the sacred grove. So they maybe remove earlier whatever stones are there. They are kept in RCC built very ugly structure, and then they collect funds. So very recently, we have seen many sacred groves in which they have gathered. Maybe the village apparently is very poor, and maybe they have contributed almost 10-20 lakhs just to build that ugly temple, which is obviously not good from the point of view of ecosystem, and it also displaces much of the wildlife from that. But obviously that particular community has aspiration to have temple. So how can we channelize that aspiration? So architects definitely can play an important role here. Sit with community, convince them that why it is good to have some kind of alternative to build temple in a little better way, a little different way. So many times it's difficult to convince even community, but we can try our best. You can give them some alternative design wherein you are using some kind of local tone instead of maybe cement plastered walls and very typical temple. So, yeah. So this is how you can maybe try to talk to communities and design temple little differently than they would get it designed with some kind of local contractor. Many times they don't even involve architects. Obviously, that kind of exposure is not there in such a remote area.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, welcome.
Ma'am,
Hmm?
I want to ask and share something. Like, I am working on a site of a sacred grove, which is like very different from what we've seen today. So that is in Gujarat, basically in the region of Kutch, where it is located near the run of Kutch. It is an arid region. So before it was a shallow sea. So basically, this sacred grove is a mangrove.
Huh.
And the uniqueness to this site is it is an inland mangrove. So basically, we see mangroves at the coastal edges, but there are only 8 mangroves in the world which are inland. So that has come up through a process. Now, there was a big, to a larger extent, it was there, but due to some of the natural factors like the cyclone had come up, so destroyed the forest area, and due to some other factors also, now actually the sacred grove is left up to only 8 trees, particularly there in that region, and it is completely like it was a forest, like it was a mangrove, but now it is the forest of the invasive species, and you can only witness 8 of the trees which was there, like of the sacred belief. Now, there is another thing that it is a temple forest. So, from the beginning, it is said that nobody goes there because they have the fear to, there had been incidents where the people died and things like that happened. So, people go to the temple, but actually they do not have a direct connect with the forest or the mangrove. So, but it is called a sacred grove. So, how do we justify the connection with the forest and the people there?
So you can suggest the alternative design, so in which you can suggest to remove the invasive planted non-natives and restore the natives. So even if, as you're saying, that local people don't have that connect anymore and they just come for the temple, So as well, maybe try to convince this to the local authorities who can understand this conservation perspective. Because now, just that way, as I told you, this conservation perspective itself is quite modern, it's quite new. So only few people can
Yes,
understand.
ma'am.
Anyways, if local people have already gone far away from it and if they are not able to relate to that, it's good to convince only authorities who can take decision for this. And you suggest an
Mm-hmm.
alternative plan, management system, wherein you phase wise remove whatever is grown and which is not wild, and then restore the earlier native mangroves, whatever are there. If you know, if you could gather some kind of secondary data, so from that you can try to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
Okay.
Can be done, I think. So many times this connection is lost, and many times because it is lost and this new. Now most of us are just like us, right? Urban. So urban people definitely have this kind of thirst to conserve things. So if you just conserve them for pure conservation, if you just convince them for pure conservation perspective, I think few of them definitely could be ready.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Even I too have one question, Kirti ma'am, with you.
Yeah.
Uh, how do we figure out the width of the buffer area?
Ah, that's a very difficult question answer actually. So it firstly again, if you look at it very much practically, whatever is feasible on ground, very much practically. So it happens the way I showed you the corridor that we had designed. It was completely connecting the two sacred groves theoretically, but it was not possible because ownership. So because many times people are not ready to give away their land just for conservation. So unless and until they are getting compensated for that. So if at all there is some kind of system wherein you can compensate that, how much buffer has to be there, it all depends on the species within the sacred grove. Yeah. So say for example, if shakru is there, that Malabar giant squirrel is there, and which is a keystone species in any. So the need is, and if say for example hardly any 1 acre sacred grove is there, so you at least need to have that much area surrounding the forest. Yeah. So it completely depends on what kind of ecosystem is there, what you need to revive, and what can
Yeah,
be revived. So
and
there are
local
this. So there are this
physiographical
the
yeah,
triangle.
situation.
Yeah, so whatever species are there, what is their need, what is feasible, and what is the local ownership. Depending on on all of this, you can decide the buffer.
Yes, definitely.
But
Um,
minimal means what you can say. So at least
30
10
feet.
meter buffers
Yeah,
definitely should be there,
yeah.
and maximum whatever you can do.
Yes, 30 feet is, I think they specify for all lakes, wetlands, and but it should be much more, and it should be practically looking at the requirement of the
Basically, and
species.
so minimal, as I said, maybe 10 meters for has to be there.
Yes. So I think it was a very interesting presentation, ma'am, and very enriching for all of us. And
Thank you.
many thanks. And we wish to see you sometimes in Bhopal and take you around. Even
Hmm.
like Paradise Flycatcher is the state bird of Madhya
Yes,
Pradesh, and we
yes.
have Bhoj wetland, and where we can see it sometimes, like in winters.
Yeah, I would love to come. Actually, I've never been to Bhopal.
We love you. We love to take you around, and
So
we
if at
have.
all there is any
One more
sacred grove, I
question,
would
ma'am.
love to come post lockdown. Maybe sometime we can go and I can actually show you how to look at biodiversity, how to identify habitats. No, let's do that sometime.
Would be wonderful, ma'am. Well, we look forward for it because you have a hands-on, and we are like theoretically trying to connect various ideas, and that your presentation was very meaningful in connecting these dots of ecology, species and biotic components interrelationships within
I'm
them.
happy. I'm happy.
Ma'am, excuse me,
Good.
ma'am. I just have one question, ma'am,
Yes.
regarding my site specific. Ma'am, can I share the screen?
Yeah. Quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
Wind up.
Now they are worried you will go away, so they are interrupting the discussion. Earlier they were sleeping little bit.
Oh,
Ma'am, can you see the screen?
yes.
Yeah, ma'am, this is actually the sacred grove within the forest. I have selected a site that's in Andhra Pradesh, which is located in the Eastern Ghats. This is in Alamalai forest. So they have given this area sacred grove as 50 hectares.
Hmm.
So if I'm considering this site, so I'm just confused. Like, how can I study the site? Like, is it completely like, should I study the whole forest area, or is only just this part? Like, how can I define this area?
So
So
again, same thing that we've been discussing, Sindhu. So as I
mm,
was telling someone else also that you should talk to local people. What is their boundary
okay,
for the sacred grove and consider that. And if at all you feel it's too big for you to study, then again by discussing with local authorities only, you can select
okay,
whatever patch for your study. But bigger the patch is good. Yeah. So
okay,
if it's
ma'am.
50 hectares, they are saying, wow, it's mind boggling. So if at all that much area is there, it's good that you should do that. At least map it on map that this is the extent of the sacred grove. And then within that, in botany, we do sampling, like maybe few quadrats are taken just for actual study.
Okay,
That can be done.
okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes. So it was really wonderful to talk to all these students, Sonal. I'm happy that
So I am like I wish to convey our thanks and gratitude for this lecture, ma'am, and we look forward for more interactions with you in future. So from
sure.
all these students and faculty, many thanks again, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.